Excuse me. So we'll open today's meeting at 1:05. This is our May 10th Budget Committee meeting. And our first item on the agenda is an executive session. And we have Barbara Schellenberg here with us today to lead us through the discussion of legal strategy for two pending litigation matters. So do I have a motion to go into executive session?
I'll make a motion to go into executive session at 1:05.
I'll second that motion.
And those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we're going to go into executive session at 1:05. And our executive session, and we've returned to our public session at 1:29 p.m. And there are no settlements to be approved, so we will pass over SE10 and SE11. And we will move to, interesting. We will move to,
He was here. Here he is. He's here.
so just in time, we're moving right along here, and it is time to discuss ED11 and ED12. And we have with us the Board of Education's Chief Operating Officer, Sean O'Keefe. So Sean, you can sit there or wherever you're comfortable, as long as the mic is on. So Sean is here. He's actually given us some background in terms of a little presentation to update us on the various and sundry COVID grants that the BOE has received to date. And then he is here to request two appropriations, one for additional appropriation for ARP funds, which we also know as ESSER 3 for $9,592,155, and one to complete, it's an additional appropriation, but to complete the remainder of the ESSER 2 grant approvals. I think we did the other ones, I actually didn't check, but I believe it was in May of last year.
That sounds about right.
And so 1 year later, we're looking at these. Do you want to sort of give us some background? And then I'm
Yeah.
sure we'll have some,
So
quite a few additional questions. And then I'd just like to ask you, when we get to the more detail, I'd rather handle them separately. One of them just requires the BET approval, and the other one requires the BET and the RTM, as you're familiar. And you can start with either one, but it might be better if you started with ED12 and then go to ED11, just because that puts them in chronological order, but you can do either one.
I was going to go through the presentation.
Yeah, that's
Does that make
great.
sense?
That's great.
Okay. I didn't number it, so I apologize for that.
That's all right.
So just a quick recap of the four grants that's been received by the Board of Ed. ESSER 1 was the first grant for $758,160, and that was appropriated by the BET and spent in full year '21. I'll give you details of that in a couple of seconds. The second one was the Coronavirus Relief Fund for $1,203,684. That also was appropriated by the BET and spent in full year '21. The third one was ESSER 2 for $4,268,046 in total, and that was partially appropriated by the BET and spent in full year '21 in the amount of $2,701,875. The remainder of that grant is being spent in full year '22, and that portion needs to be appropriated today in the amount of $1,566,171. The fourth one is the ARP, also known as ESSER 3, and the total is $9,592,155. And those funds have begun being spent in full year '22 and are committed in the state grant system for spending continue from full year '22 through full year '24. Again, in the amount of $9,592,155. So that's a quick recap of the four grants.
Thank,
Just a quick, on the two grants that have been fully spent, the ESSER 1, 758, it was predominantly for technology to facilitate remote learning, include laptops, Chromebooks, portable smart boards, headphones, tripods, things like that. And then there was a small amount of teaching supplies, various teaching supplies. And again, fully appropriated and fully spent in full year '21. The second one, Coronavirus Relief Fund for $1,203,684. The breakdown is, you can see it listed, there was facilities-related supplies and equipment for $521,000, and then there was various teaching and learning supplies, various subscription fees to facilitate remote learning, PPE for staff and students, triple window barrier shields for desks and tables, and various teaching supplies. So again, appropriated and fully spent in full year '21. For the remaining part, I'm sorry, that was, let me see, Coronavirus Relief Fund for ESSER 2 in full year '21. Again, $2,701,875 was appropriated and spent in full year '21. And that breakdown, certified staff for ALP, which was an additional 0.3 FTE for each of the 11 elementary schools, so that the ALP staff could go from a 1.7 in each school to 2.0. Also, summer evaluations related to special ed, and then remote teachers. We also had some non-certified staff for the warehouse, for police overtime, and temporary custodians that added $190,000. And then we had $969,000 in technology to facilitate remote learning, including laptops, Chromebooks, and so on. And then there was various facility supplies for $238,000, plus we had food service transportation in the summer of 2020, totaling $234,000. So the remaining ESSER 2 in full year '22, $1,566,171. The spending breakdown, staff salary and benefits in total $1,005,000. Includes 5 FTE for social workers in the ESSER 2. The 5 social workers are in ARP for full year '23 and '24. And the social workers are essentially to address food insecurity, mental health needs, connections with nonprofit agencies, and then the next one is 5 math interventionists, which are in ESSER 2 for full year '22 only. And they've been, if you recall, they're included in the operating request for full year '23. The 3.3 FTE for ALP, I mentioned earlier, 0.3 in each of the elementary schools. And then the town allocation of benefits as coordinated between my office and Roland for $285. And then about $20,000 of various facility supplies. For the ARP ESSER 3, the total $9,592,000. So that's spent and or committed for full year '22, full year '24. So when I say committed, it's committed in the State Department of Education grant system. And you could read the focus of the grant is to spend at least 20% on learning loss, learning acceleration, academic renewal, student achievement, and so on. It's really a transformative grant. And the transformation includes family, community connections, social, emotional, and extended school days, enrichment, and so on. It's all in there. Then we have the breakdown of the $9.592 million. And for the human resource part of it, you can see in the bold, It represents about 4.6 million out of the 9.6 over the 3-year period. There's a substitute incentive pay, which is an increase in the subrate to attract and retain teacher substitutes. And there's additional rate increase if you work in full week periods. 3.5 teacher, SPED teachers at Central, Ghs Center, and Western Middle School to address learning loss and reduce caseloads. A half an FTE in Eastern Middle School for English and speech teacher to address various needs in learning loss. Half a head count in assistive technology, which is a district-wide position. Small FTE increase in Old Greenwich. 0.6 reading interventionalists at Western Middle School. 1 million math interventionists also at Western. 1 math teacher at Western and 1 psychologist at Western, all to address learning loss. Then you have the social workers again, which was an ESSER 2 in full year 22. We have that in 23 and 24 in the ARP. And that's across, those 5 social workers will be working in all of the elementary schools. You have the 3.3 ALP that I mentioned already, and the town allocation of benefits. And then you have the remainder in facilities, food services, and teaching and learning, which are provided in greater detail in the appendix. So, any questions?
I'm sure there's lots of questions. I did have.
Leslie, for the good of the order, should we dispense with ESSER 2? And then I liked your idea of going chronologically. Can we do that on the agenda?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we, at least, I agree, I think we should do that, but I just want to make sure that we don't, on the initial sort of overview questions, and then we can talk more specifically in, Sean's good overview here. And thank you for this, giving us the background. It's been a rough time for everyone. So I just first ask, before we get to that, if we could just make sure there's no questions on at least the packages we've seen this package. I'll ask the first question.
Okay.
Was this package presented to the BOE? And also, we can, I want to ask a couple specific questions when we get to ESSER 2 and ESSER 3.
It's been, ever since the first grant, we've been putting this in the monthly financial report, and it's reviewed every month in the financial report. So it's been, we've tried to be as transparent as possible.
Okay, and then I'm going to get into a territory that, maybe I'm a little bit off here, but I want to just, Mr. Minarski, Pete Minarski, our wonderful controller. If we just look at these grants today, because we're talking about this on the town's ARP side, so this is, this all then needs to be audited and so forth. Otherwise, is it correct that these funds, like the other funds that the town will get in ARP, could possibly have to be returned or something? Is there a compliance issue? Is anyone tracking this? And also, I know that there have been delays just because perhaps not all the information has come in from whatever. But are these past various and sundry grants, maybe up through ESSER 2, the first half, have they been audited? Are they part of your single audit yet? And what is the status? I just want to make sure we understand.
There's 2 questions. The first question is, yes, they've been audited. The way it goes is the first audit covers the period of 2020 to 2021, July 1st through June 30th, which would cover the ESSER 1 and part of the ESSER 2 and part of the Corona relief, which is called Coronavirus Relief Fund. I'm not familiar, I am very familiar with the town side with the U.S. Treasury. And if through you to Sean, I don't know the clawback provisions about For example, if you didn't spend it all, I believe they're going to spend it all. And I don't know the audit requirements as far as eligibility, if they are deemed ineligible through the single audit. But your first question is basically, yes, they started auditing coronavirus relief fund and ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. But I don't know about the clawback provision.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if something is deemed ineligible, if we have an opportunity to, replace that with another item. That's a question I do not know the answer to.
And then the other question, and this is really, it's a little bit off of what we have to do here, but it impacts us in terms of our other town ARP. Administratively, and what you've had to do, or preparing for the audits, or maybe it's Pete that I need to talk to. Has there been a need for additional human resources? I mean, has it been a burden or anything? And what I'm looking to is then, as we go to the larger ESSER 3, to make sure that similar to the ARP, and I'm not sure if it's sufficient, that we have in there, there's sufficient human resources or administrative, they could be outside or whatever, but administrative to make sure that we're doing everything that we need in this program so that it doesn't become too much of a burden, because first it becomes a burden on you, and then it becomes a burden on the finance department as they go through the audit. So if you can just help us a little bit to get a feel for that.
I mean, we talked about it a little bit, and I totally agree that, it is an eligible expense if we needed administrative support. I know I rely heavily on one of my staff people who, does, works on the budget, works on the monthly financials. So it's been somewhat of a strain on her, and she's been doing a great job. She tracks every single expense, every single one, and it's literally hundreds and hundreds of items to track. So, but she's doing it because she knows that it's going to get audited. In fact, the U.S. Department of Education has already said that they will be initiating an audit to review. Not sure what the scope is of that audit, probably only on, expenses that have already been incurred.
So again, this is just to get a better feel for, as we go to the larger grants, whether it's the BOE or the towns. Pete,
Don't keep going, I'll follow up with Sean.
just to make sure that, when we have these grants, that if it's appropriate, we shouldn't just spend them on all these other things, that we should make sure that we have the support we need for, the finance department in the
for the
Board of
big one-
Education and in the town, or, administratively, to make life similar. It shouldn't be additional burden. It should work seamlessly into the workloads, I think.
Yeah, if I
But
think that
Pete, I think Pete had a question too.
Yeah, I
for
was
you.
just going to expand on your question to Sean and Sean's answer about the extra burden. The single audit is in place if the town spends more than $750,000. If you go to the Board of Education site and you go to the monthly meetings and you go to Sean's presentation and the financial package, there's one document in there that it shows all of the grants that they receive. So before COVID started, you look through, for example, Perkins Grant, Title I grant, and it goes on and on and on. They have a normal requirement to report them, all of them grants through the single audit. And I'm just speaking to the Board of Ed side. It also on the town side, they audit the LoSIP, they audit LOTSIP, all of the other grants on the other side. Where the extra burden comes in is with ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. You take that, and his staff, one particular person, in particular Pat Marinan, the extra burden is you've got more grants that are on top of, which is the ESSER 1 and 2, the normal grants that they get every year. The auditors in year one of ESSER had 2 extensions. They were waiting for guidance from the Office of Budget and Management at the federal level. In the second year, the second tranche, they had 4 extensions. Now, the answer to the Board of Ed is simple, that yes, it's an extra burden because there's a bunch of new grants, more money, a lot more money that they've been getting in the past, and there's new guidance. Don't lose sight of the fact that this guy over here in my staff works a lot more with the overall single audit because it extends beyond that. We spent a lot of time on Nathaniel Witherall this year. I think Tyler's here. Tyler, he got involved too with the single audit because he got ARPA monies this year too. So it's not only the Board of Ed, it's town-wide. And the money is starting to explode in size. You can see when he gave you his 1, 2, 3, and 4, where the fourth tranche is 9.5 million, our tranche is now up to 31.4 million. So the answer is simple. And one of the precautions we're taking is Pat coming to the meeting tomorrow? Roland has taken the lead, and we're starting for next year tomorrow. He's assembling the group from the Board of Education, Nathaniel Witherall? Okay, Nathaniel Witherall and all the town side. So we're starting tomorrow, even though the year's not over, to prepare for the 22-23 audit. The good news is that you've got a lot of money. The bad news is if you want to call it bad news, it is a burden and it's a lot of extra work.
So, in talking with Sean here, I didn't mean to leave Roland out because I know Roland does so much work here. But what I am trying to understand as we get these requests in, whether the entities, and you know I've been a big pusher of making sure we have additional administrative funds in the ARP for the town, and I happen to believe it's deficient. We need more, but you say we'll be able to do that. I just want to make sure that we're incorporating these things and we aren't overburdening our staff, which means you, and it means Sean, and it means Roland, and that we address this now before we have a crisis at a future date, because, you know, this is a blessing to get all this additional money, but there's a lot of responsibility that goes with it. So it's a little bit off the track here in terms of the presentation, but I still think it's something that we need to think about as we go through and then look at the approvals of the sums and what's presented, that whether that have the foresight to understand the additional burden that we're taking on here.
If I may
Yes,
follow up, it's just, the way you could take the burden away is you could take like a rubber band, stretch it. You don't want to break it, but you stretch it, and it takes the burden away at the back end. And I'll give you an example, is Roland, Maureen Tracy, and I met this morning. The first thing we did is, last night you approved the ARP, the $31.4 million. The chief accountant loaded up the $31.4 million budget into the current year because it's been officially passed. We met and we went through and we're preparing a strategy on how to prepare the audit files going on the front side. And I'm drifting because you keep referring to the burden that's placed on it. And I want to say that it's a little bit more top-heavy on the town side as opposed to the Board of Ed side. So we set up the budget in the munis package. We're preparing to start the initial transactions. The very first transaction would be the GHS remediation. We went in and what did we spend? About $7 million to date. That would be JV'd from the B fund, which is the bond fund, to the F fund, which is the grant fund. We can't give the affordable trust fund money to the piece that was allocated by the BET until the conditions are met. So that will be, but budget's in place. We can't make that transaction until that money has been conditioned released. At the same time, Ben Branyan contacted me, and we started to address the third parties. They're called sub-recipients. We are working on all the contracts. Tyler, if he's still behind me, is part of the process. As you know, he was part of the advisory group that met during the working group. So what we're doing is we're getting ready for the third parties. both through I forgot, I think it was $1,318,000, and then the Dr. Nelson's programs through Human Services. So Leslie, I think the point I'm trying to make is we're trying to put all the work on the front end so that there's less work on the back end. And then when the auditors come, they'll have a package that's ready to audit immediately. So if we find that it's overburdening, we'll do two things. Number one is you gave us $100,000 for extra consultant help, which is one of the line items. And number two is we'll ask for help. One of the things is we had a first coupon mature yesterday on some of the ARP money. We got $43,000. So we're probably, and there's three pieces to the first 15 million invested. We'll probably come to you to go through the process again. I believe it'll start with the working group. And if we need help, and if Sean can convince us that, well, no, Sean didn't get any town ARP money, so he's on his own. But to take the burden away, we'll have the funds and come and ask for it again in the future.
So
Sean got $8
actually,
million for HVAC.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think about 57% of our money that we got for the ARP is in the BOE. So I didn't mean to, when I'm focusing on Sean, so I apologize to you, Pete, and Roland. I didn't necessarily mean that he's got the burden and you guys don't. So I'm wondering, and this is now getting away from the reason we have this conversation to begin with, if we shouldn't add to one of our agendas in either June or July, sometime before we all go off on holiday, just an update, for you to give us an update as a special report at our budget committee meeting in June or July, just so you can explain all of this stuff to us, because we know there's a lot of additional work, but we don't necessarily. So, I mean, I don't want to add work to your schedule, but maybe just a nice update would be helpful to all of us.
The point I'm trying to make is that I don't want you to segregate. Your questions are legitimate with the Board of Ed, but this is a team effort.
Right.
This is a town document. The finance department, and it'll come for you next month with the single audit when we go through the audit committee and the BET, plus the auditors give their presentation. That all of these grants, it's a team effort. We work together, but it becomes the product of the finance department that goes through as you all know, the audit committee and the BET. So they're interchangeable. When the auditors audit Nathaniel Wither, for example, it involves the finance department. When the auditors audit the Board of Education, it involves the finance department. So it's a team effort, and everything funnels down into the finance department. And then it ends up, for informational purposes, not only to the reporting agencies like the Office of Policy and Management and the U.S. Treasury, the BET in the end. That's all. I was just trying to stress that it's a team effort, and it's just not they're a silo and we're a silo.
No, and I appreciate that, and that's why I brought up the point about the single audits, and I know it's been a struggle this year because of all the extensions, and so I'm very sympathetic to that, and I'm sympathetic really because we see all the extra work we've had because we're sort of been running two budgets, the one for the ARP and the one for the regular. But I think this is helpful, and we will ask for an update on all of this, and maybe Sean needs to go over and have coffee with you guys and works the team, something, fun. Anyway, I think Laura's had her hand up.
I just wanted to check my understanding. The ARPA grant we received upfront, we need to determine eligibility and uses. My understanding is for the BOE, there was a vetting of some sort with the state. It was dispersed through the state. There was an application to the state. So can you just talk about the process for a little bit, and maybe the risk of ineligible proceeds going is maybe a little minimized because the state's already had a vetting process. Is that correct?
When the ARP was announced, I think it was spring of last year, if I'm not mistaken, we were given a date of, I think it was like August 24th, to input our first draft of how we would propose to spend the money. And, it's a moving request insofar as that if something changes, I mean, it's a multi-year expenditure, so if something new comes up that we want to replace something with, we can do that. We can actually change it in the system, but we have to request that with the Department of Education. They have to then allow us to, go in and make a change. But yeah, they reviewed that, what we input back in August of last year, they reviewed for eligibility and it seemed to go fine.
So can I just ask a follow-up? Yes. So, for instance, so ESER 2 changed a little bit because you had to include the benefits.
Correct.
So you made some alterations. So that process went
ESER
smoothly.
2 and ESER and ARP.
Well, I'm looking at,
Because we didn't have anything in full year '22. So that was the change, that we had it in '23 and '24 for ARP.
Right.
But didn't have benefits in there for either ESER 2 or ARP for full year '22, which is now in there.
okay, and
So
that
we had
wasn't a
to move
problem.
something
So
ar-
you're able to make those adjustments?
We
without-
were.
Okay, very
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
Yep.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? So Sean, in my, just review of the Department of Ed process and when you applied for this grant, when you give the specifics, my understanding is that the grant actually is not reviewed at a line item. It's just reviewed for completion and and the reality is just pure logistical, right? You have 169 towns, thousands of schools that are applying. You have $1 billion that are being applied for in grant money. So the idea that on the Department of Ed, they're going to go line by line to approve a specific transaction simply doesn't exist. In some sense, the burden is on you to ensure that you are indeed applying for, what is appropriate, and it looks like all of these are appropriate funds.
Yep.
The real check is really coming into place when the audit happens to ensure that, you said you were going to spend for 2 teachers, because they understand you have Board of Eds and finance guys that are looking at this to make sure, you're not inputting something like, a spa day or something, right?
You're
You know what I mean? Just to give you an example.
The audit is where the rubber meets the road.
Right.
That's where they will go item by item, make sure that, this is the process that we expect. We really haven't seen a lot of information about how the audit is going to be conducted.
Yeah, and the reason I want to stress that is the actual transactions of the 9.5 or the 4.2 really have not specifically been blessed by the state or the Department of Ed. They simply have been accepted, and accepted just means you've hit submit.
I think that's an accurate depiction.
They've been submitted. And
Yeah.
again, the reason to have that clarification is that we really need to ensure that the funds, that the way that they've been allocated have been approved by certain bodies, right? So right now, and again, just having watched the Board of Ed meetings, there is a concern that some of these allocations have not been approved by the Board of Ed. So we're a financial board, right? We're just going to ensure that, from the finance side, but, it's not in my purview to discuss whether, you should have 5 in special ed or 4 in special ed and whatnot. But the concern that I really have is that the Board of Ed, to me, has not blessed these allocations, right? So I just went back and read some of the minutes from last year and the Budget Committee. So I want you to just help us understand what the process was. I know you had a town hall. I know you took input from parents. I know the PTA was involved, and, certain vested individuals, right, helped you think through the allocation. Now, did you just, like, for example, did you and Tony sit down, Dr. Jones sit down and say, all right, this is going to be our net allocation, and then it was an FYI to the board? Why was the Board of Ed not involved in that? Why did they not participate in, for example, saying, we want X amount and I don't know, who made that decision? And was it in a vacuum? Was it the board chair was involved? Was it you and Dr. Jones sat in a room and did this?
The proposals were made, by Dr. Jones, the deputy superintendent, myself, the director of curriculum, special ed director, and we put together a plan that we input, and that plan was incorporated into, the monthly measurements that we show. And, we do go, in detail when we discuss what's on that list. And in fact, we discussed it with the Finance Committee of the Board of Ed. And then we've actually had one-on-one meetings with one of the board members, to go through it. We spent a good portion of our Friday afternoon going through that in detail, so.
I'm sorry, just if it's okay, I'll just have some questions. So the Budget Committee or the Finance Committee or, the committees are not really they don't have any authority, right, in terms of approval, even 8-member Board of Ed, right? And again, none of this looks anything to me here looks inappropriate, right? They all look like appropriate charges,
Yeah.
right? And it all appears to me to be all appropriate allocation, and I don't have any way of, for example, saying, why did Western get 3 and Eastern get, those are really, they're not suited for this particular board. My concern really is why did you not seek a full Board of Ed approval before you put in that grant application on August 16th? Why did you not just, here's 8 members of our board. I know you have a 3-member finance committee that looked at this, and they kind of just said, all right, this is fine. But why was it not a part? Because the real concern I have here is this is a large amount of money, and we want to ensure, again, not because I think these are inappropriate charges, but these are all fungible allocations. And I think it's a false statement to say, well, the Department of Ed has already accepted these, because again, they don't have the ability to go line by line to say, you know that, and I know that, this is all going to be after the
They don't have
fact.
the people.
So
They
I
don't have the
think,
people.
I think you brought up some really good points, and maybe we can get back to some of these when we get to the individual.
Well,
But I think that also that, we're very grateful to have Sean come to us. It's been a long time since, we've waited 1 year since last May to even see anything, and we appreciate Sean's cooperation and, respect of our town process. But I want to just finish the audit questions before we get to this other, which I think is very important. And my question, when Sean was asking about, or telling us about audits, I just want to make sure that we all understand what happens here. Is there a separate State Board of Education audit? And to Pete's point, is this incorporated into your plan, or is this only in the Board of Education? I guess the first question is to you,
Okay.
because you brought it up.
Yeah, it is a U.S. Department of Education.
U.S. Department of Education.
And we really, as I said, we really don't have a lot of details. They announced it, that it would be coming and starting, in late spring, summer, and, but they have not been forthcoming on details yet.
And Pete, is this just similar to what's in the parallel that's happening on the ARP? Because I know you've had questions and with the IRS or someplace and had difficulty getting them, responded to or whatever. I mean, just want to make sure that we're understand here what's happening.
Just please restate the question about the audit process.
Well, Sean has said that, and he's now clarified, that the U.S. Department of Education will also audit what their program is. And so will that be incorporated into your process, your overview process, or yours is only the outside auditors?
No, it's these ESSER grants. I don't know if there's a parallel audit. Anecdotally, I could tell you, in the case of, we got CARES Act money from the Office of Policy and Management. All 169 towns got CARES Act money in the state of Connecticut. There was a defalcation in the town of West Haven, Connecticut. As a result, now this is on the town side, not the Board of Ed. It resulted in an audit of all 169 towns. We only got $423,000 2 years ago from fully appropriated accounts. That's one piece. There's other pieces where we've applied for FEMA money where we're going to get $397,000. The process is a little bit different, for example, with FEMA. FEMA is you have to verify on the front end, as opposed to their process of asking for the money, getting the money, and spending it. FEMA is we have to document that we spent the money. Then we have to prove with copies of checks, copies of requisitions, purchase orders. We request the money, so we get a percentage, and I think it's like 75% of 100%, 75% of expenditures. When we get the money back, they're subject to the single audit. Okay, so I think the question you're asking is do they have separate auditing entities? I don't know the answer for ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 because it's brand new to me. He's better qualified I don't know if he's going to get audited twice, is the simple answer.
Okay, so anyway, it sounds like we're going to get audited a lot. So, we better be ready for it and make sure we have the resources. And Leslie has her hand up, and then I'll go back to Nisha.
Now, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question from the concern you had before, is that if our administrative burden in responding to audits or even just preparing the necessary files exceeds our expectations or our staff's ability to manage, we have, at this point, the ARP funds, the ESSER 3 funds, you've got committed in certain areas, though you can redeploy or move things around, especially fiscal 23 and fiscal 24 funds, which are still, we're looking forward. But the town is getting interest on the funds, as is we're getting interest on the Board of Ed funds too, which have been received. So those funds can be allocated to administrative costs. You haven't anticipated that income at this point, if necessary.
Peter,
And I just
So
wanted
the
to
only point here
confirm.
I want to do is just bring up the point that we need to make sure that the support is here, whether it's for the town side or the BOE, to make sure that they are incorporating into these programs the administrative support that the departments that are actually doing the day-to-day operations on this, not just spending the money, have the support so that it doesn't become a real burden.
And Pete's ready to answer the question, but I just wanted to make sure, we've accounted-wise, we've segregated the money, the cash we've received for ESSER 3 and the cash we've received for the town. But the income, does that get allocated pro rata?
Reimbursement, right? It's reimbursement, isn't it, on the ESSER?
Is the ESSER 3 reimbursement?
ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, and please jump in, Sean, if I misspeak. ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 were spent from appropriated accounts in the general fund, which means that they didn't get any interest. It was reimbursement after the fact.
Right.
So that's lost money on the general fund side, because all the cash in the general fund it goes through Natasha's treasurer's report. I believe through the chair to Sean, how does ESSER 3 work? Is that a reimbursement process? You don't get anything in advance, correct?
Well, I think you did, right?
I think you got,
Didn't you get that already? Didn't you get half of it last June?
The 9.5?
And by the way, it's ESSER 1 and CRF that we fully spent.
When did we get 9.5?
might have gotten half of it, but.
No, the half was all on the town side. That's ARP money. I'm not sure. I don't think we got the 9.5 or half of the 9.5.
Let's check the treasurer's report. Miriam's signaling me that she just sent it.
I can follow up on that.
Did you have a question, Miriam? No, okay.
Saying I just forwarded the treasurer's report, I can send it, I don't see, at least Natasha's normal report, I don't.
So anyway, these are good questions. They aren't, they're things that, as we begin these programs, and this is why it's good that it's here before the BET for approval. And perhaps if this had been before the BOE, they would be asking some of these questions first. Nisha has a question.
Leslie, you're smirking on this, but.
I'm sorry?
You're smirking a little bit when you're making these statements, but I really just want to focus, I know we're talking about audit, and I think audit is a really important part of oversight, right? And I think that's part of our responsibility here, but to me, one of the most important parts of oversight is also before the fact, before we spend, right? So all of this is really important to make sure we spend how we're going to spend. And we are, as the financial board, we do have a lot more ability to approve funds on the town side. But on the school side, we're not approving any of these funds. So I am really uncomfortable by the fact that the Board of Ed did not approve these allocations before the grant application for ESSER 3. I know they weren't followed for ESSER 1 or ESSER 2, and I understand some of it is, you just had to do what you had to do, and, for especially early on when, the COVID relief funds came, but some of these 4.2 million and the 9.6 million that came through for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, the last board, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the last Board of Ed meeting, the financials were not approved based upon the discussion on ESER 2 and ESER 3, that the Board of Ed requested that they wanted additional controls and they wanted additional transparency. And again, the transparency is not that, because after the fact is very different than before the fact, right? So there's two aspects of oversight. And I think the before one, I know we're focusing on the after one because that's all we can do. A lot of this money's already been spent. But ESER 3, we still have, fiscal year 23 and 24, which I know you're saying they're committed. They're not really, in some sense, committed because I know they've applied for the grant, but we have ability to totally juggle that around if we wanted to, right? And I'm not saying we have to, but it would be nice to see that, I'd like the entire Board of Ed to bless these allocations and say, if they want to move them around, they want to find, because that to us is going to give us a lot more comfort
We
when
have
you
a
come to
finance
us.
committee, I believe it's next week, so I will bring that up.
So the Finance Committee, again, I want to be very careful because that's what was done last year. The Finance Committee is just a 3-member committee that.
Start with the finance
Start with the
committee
Finance
and then go to
Committee.
the full board.
It should go to the full board. The full board should approve these funds. So right now, ESER 2 and ESER 3 have not been approved by the Board of Ed. What you've come to today to get approved really have not been in your March 31st meeting, the March 31st financials, which were presented to the board in April. In the last meeting, the financials were not approved. If you can correct me if I'm wrong, the vote was,
Yeah.
right? So
So maybe next month we need to have someone, come from the Board of Education and talk with them too. But I think that Sean is doing what he can do, and we are very grateful to Sean for bringing this forth and giving us the
no,
information
Dusty,
so that
this-
we can ask these questions. And I think that, to me, this is precedent setting, and I keep to have this come without having had Board of Ed approval. But should we get to the actual applications? Should we start with ESER 2, which was your request? Start chronologically?
I guess I'm a little confused at this point. Are we saying that this needs to have action by the Board of
No,
Education? before we
we're
act,
moving
or-
ahead with what we have today. We have no choice,
Okay.
right?
I guess.
It may not be our typical process, but this is why Sean is here, to get approval, so,
Well, I understand, but
So,
I'm hearing two different
so
things.
we have before us ED11 and ED12, and my recommendation is that we start with ED12 only because it's ESER 2. Right? That's what you said too, correct?
I believe you have to vote on it if you're taking them out of order.
Oh, I'm sorry. What-
ED11 is next on the agenda.
Okay.
The 9,000,005.
So,
I make a motion to alter the order of the agenda to take up ED12 first, and perhaps for simplicity, rename it ED11. Is that possible?
I don't know. We'll ask Roland.
I think it's simple, just vote on 9.5 first and the smaller one second. Vote on ED11 first and ED12 second.
All right, so I
Okay.
withdraw my motion.
Okay. So can you please go through, there's an appendix. We're going to start with ESER, we're going to start with ARP for 9592, although I actually like the other way of doing it chronologically. I'm going to ask for a motion to, I'm going to ask you to repeat your motion, and then I'm going to ask for a second, to begin with ED12. Take it out of order.
I think that's confusing, Pete, who's taking minutes. No, that's okay?
We won't
Okay.
renumber them.
We
We're
won't
going to keep
renumber
them.
them. All right, I'll make a motion to take up ED12 before ED11.
Is there a second? I'll second it. Okay, so Laura moved and Leslie seconded. Those in favor? 4-0. Okay, so we're going to talk about ED12, which is ESER 2. We're going to go through the blue sheet request for ESER 2. So do you want to just go through? I think you've had an overall breakdown. Does the appendix have any additional information only on the ARP, right? So in terms of ESER 2, the money is completely 100% spent, correct?
Will be spent by the end of the year. So we have salaries in there, there's still a couple of pay periods to go.
And the benefits are in here, which is critically important because that will be reimbursing our benefit accounts. And I guess I asked I asked Roland, these benefits, you have worked with Sean or aware, and these numbers are in order, correct? And in ESER 2, of course, I'm looking for it, the second half, there's no capital. This is all people and things and benefits, correct?
Correct.
It says, well, that's really operating. PPE is
Yeah,
really
that's
operating. It's
operating.
not capital as such. And facility supplies are just, minuscule as a
Yeah,
scheme
it's
of
all,
this.
it's all expense.
So is there any other questions that we'd like to ask Sean? We understand that it was not previously approved by the BOE, and it's up for our approval, and the total amount on our sheet is $1,566,171. Are there any questions, or is there a motion to approve?
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you, Sean, do you have a sense of how much to date has been spent, like, by school? Like, I know you mentioned a few of the positions, like,
We know exactly what's been spent to date and how much is to go.
so of
So how
the,
much is spent to date and what's projected to get to that 1.566 million?
so can you give me a sense of the 4.2 and ESER 2? Because that's, the fiscal year is almost over anyways, right, through the end of June. Of that 4.2, for example, has it been kind of pro rata across the schools? Have the elementary schools gotten a little bit more simply because of
What's the 4.2?
the ESER 2 funding, the total ESER 2 funding
Yeah,
for fiscal year 21, 22?
yeah.
I know 1.6 is what's the balance, but the entire 4.2, can you give us a sense of by school, kind of, is it equally kind of attributed across all 15 schools? Is it certain elementary schools got a larger portion of it?
Yes, so for example, wherever the teachers are located, that's where it's applicable to.
I know, so do you know what, I'm just asking you, can you tell me?
We could, sure. I don't have it with me
You
now.
don't, like intuitively, you don't have a sense, did we do a little bit, I'm just trying to get a sense of, did we spend more on the elementary schools or the middle school, like the social workers, were they more
The
focused on?
social workers are
or more on the
elementary, the
yeah.
ALP is elementary.
I mean, did the high school get any piece of the ESER too, or do you think it's more?
I would tell you, if you're looking at ESER 2, the social workers elementary, math interventionists, that is also, I believe, elementary, and then, yeah, it's all elementary.
Elementary, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a report you could provide us, like, just,
Where? Yeah, we could get to
yeah,
it.
by school, just it'd be great to see the entire, the 16 million that's going to be between all of the COVID relief funds, and I think parents would be interested in seeing that as well.
As far as the head count, we can certainly, wherever they are located by school.
Yeah.
As far as like the
'Cause that's-
disinfectant, I
Yeah.
don't think we can split
Well,
that
no, I don't
up.
think that, but that's the bulk of the cost is people,
Sure.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So do I have any other questions? Do I have a motion to approve? Leslie, motion
So
to,
I'll make a motion to approve the appropriation of $1,566,171.
and is there a second for that motion? Okay. So we take a vote. Leslie? Vote in the affirmative?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
I will vote yes.
And I'm voting no simply because the Board of Ed has not approved these allocations.
Okay. And now we will bring up ED11, which is, we took them out of order, so that's for $9,592,155. I will also, once again, say this is precedent setting, that we have not had Board of Education approval prior to our approval. On the other hand, we have budget resolutions that require BET and RTM approval. And so there's an opportunity for the RTM approve this in the month of June. And I think that this is, by charter. So anyway, Sean, do you want to run through this appendix first? I think that would be helpful on the SR3, because that's one that's really just started this year, and we've never really heard from you or seen anything on SR3 until we just got your earlier presentation, but there is a nice little appendix.
So the human resources I've already addressed. I don't know if you want me to go over it again, or it's really, I thought it was, if you look at the chart, the last chart before the appendix, it's kind of an abbreviated version of that chart, and that was my intent to just go over the human resources in more detail, which I did. And then the appendix is really, to go through, this is what we have in our monthly package. But if I go below, right below the benefits, facilities, you've got 60,000 of deep cleaning materials. There's a 64,000 for the media room at the high school to make that space more usable, given social distancing. Fair amount of money for PPE, as you can imagine, including COVID tests, kits, gloves, masks, flute boots. Never knew what a flute boot was before, but now I know. Had a small amount for container storage, storing furniture that we were not able to use temporarily due to COVID, due to social distancing. The 175 for the HVAC improvement that was not, so it's in the glass corridor, by the entryway. That was not part of the entryway project, so that's in there. And then some ionization projects, North Miamis and 4 other schools. For anyone who doesn't know, I had to get a tutorial on this. Needlepoint ionization is a process by which a charge within an airstream that makes small particles into larger ones so that the filtration system can capture it. So I don't know if that makes any sense to everybody, but that's what it is. 500,000 for Ghs Center Redesign. So that recently we went out to bid for that. It's not construction, it's more of furniture and fixture type of things to make it more usable for the students, bring the space into 21st century learning. 440 for Transition House, that's for our community connection students. It's kind of like an apartment setup so that they learn life skills, how to cook in the kitchen and so on. There's 100,000 in there for the DTC consultant that was used for the assessment for Central Middle School. Food services, meal delivery, that's in the summer of 2021. On the second page, you've got all the teaching and learning. Let me pick out the big ones here. 211,000 for classroom libraries to address K through 2 learning loss. 100,000 for PCG, creation of the action plan, and some related professional development for the staff. 530,000 for hands-on STEM-based instruction for science materials. Reading clinic supplies. Those are the big hitters.
So this is a reimbursement program, correct? Or you got this program upfront?
You mean the money?
Yes.
My understanding is the money's up front. So that's a question I think.
So
Can we clarify that point? 'Cause
I was just going to ask.
I'm scouring the treasurer's
One of
report.
you, whoever is, could someone please clarify this before Monday's meeting? Okay, whether it's reimbursement or whether the money is upfront. I think that's an important question to know.
I'm pretty sure it's up front.
Okay, and if it's upfront, then I would request that any interest be used to supplement any kind of needs that you have for administration of this, and I'll call it in the finance department, working with the town's centralized department, because, okay?
Yep.
I don't know how we do that, but I'd like to can we say something like that? I think we can.
Sure.
Okay. And the other thing I'd like to request, Sean, at least in terms of, it looks like it's primarily fiscal year, no, I'm not quite sure. Wherever there's capital items, would you review with Roland, or P2, which are the capital items, if any? And that any of these capital items, would you please have
Prepare a
prepared
CIP
for, Monday's meeting, a CIP sheet for each of any of the items that Roland and Pete might think are equivalent of capital items, so that we get them into the right little box, and that we then put them on our, open capital reports,
Sure.
okay?
Yep.
Quite frankly, I'm very comfortable supporting 22, but, fiscal 23 and fiscal 24, particularly 24, it appears to me that our needs by then, the environment keeps changing so rapidly, may be totally different than this. So to Nisha's point here, and now I think your response to her, this is not really as much in stone as we originally thought.
There is the ability to make changes.
There is the ability to make changes. And there is ability to put an administration line at the bottom to make sure that that's being. And the other thing I'll make another comment on is, I know that Roland and Agnes worked very hard to work on this benefits during our very, very busy budget season. But I also think that we had another 2% increase in health benefits that came up, just before April 19th, and another 0.5% that was added on towards the end of last week, right, Roland? So I think that, these benefit numbers perhaps should be modified to what we know and we've added in our other budget as the increased health expenses.
For 23, 24? I mean,
Yeah, for 23,
well, for
24.
23, I guess that's what the 10.5% is.
That's what, it's 10.5. So just review with Roland and Agnes whether these numbers need to be modified accordingly.
Sorry, Miriam is sharing with me thank you, Miriam, in real time, the treasury report that IAC reviews. It's not part of our BET monthly packet. And the BOE grant fund is way over budget. It was budgeted at 6.326, and it's currently over 22 million. So it looks like we've gotten the fund.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you for the research.
Thank you, Miriam.
So I guess that just needs to be confirmed that was the source, but that's great. That's great news. Questions?
I mean, I have a lot of questions, but I think I'm quite confused here, because I feel like we're voting on approving, and I just want to please help me understand the process. Maybe I'm just missing something here. If we approve these funds today, are you still planning on going back to the Board of Ed because why would you go back if once we approve it and this allocation's been approved?
Appropriation.
So the actual allocation I think it's a little bit putting the cart before the horse here in terms of, for example, I'm just not clear, what authority does the Board of Ed, what authority was there when we applied for the grant to go ahead and spend this money, even for fiscal year 22? I'm very concerned. 23 and 24, it looks like we can at least have a discussion on it today. But the Board of Ed did not approve these allocations. So you really didn't have any authority to spend what you already spent. Now, I understand this is a technicality, and I know I'm thankful you're here today and communicating with us what's actually going on. But I want to remind you, this is not okay, right? You have to really, there's law, right? You have to follow the law. The law is that in order for this town, for you to spend this money, you need approval. You, Dr. Jones and yourself or whoever's filling out these grants, you don't have the ability to just allocate them in a certain manner and say, well, the finance committee signed off on them, and based on that, we're spending. I understand we can't go back. If this had come to me last year or earlier in the year, I would have 100% had the same discussion. If you recall, when this came in front of the budget day, I had the same questions as to who was involved, where are these surveys, what parents are requesting this, simply because I saw on the Board of Ed, they didn't have the comfort. So I want to remind you, I really am not I'm not comfortable approving ESSER 3 at all. 22 looks like it's already spent. I don't have much control, but I would ask this board to also be very thoughtful in ensuring that we are not putting the cart before the horse. I don't want to appropriate this capital until I know that the Board of Ed has really approved the sub-allocations here, and maybe they're not going to change. Maybe they're going to be completely okay with the way it's been defined, but this is not, no one is above the law here, so we need to be very careful that we're seeking the appropriate processes, where the town process is such that you do need to get Board of Ed approval before you do the spend, and before you did the grant application. So today, I'm not sure what we're approving, and if that means that we're going to approve this and it's going to go back to the Board of Ed, and then they're going to make changes and it's going to come back to us, or, what is the process here? So I feel very uncomfortable approving, I was very uncomfortable approving ESSER 2, which has already been spent, and I'm very uncomfortable approving the ESSER 3 allocation, which I really believe has not been vetted, and the appropriate processes have not been followed. And it looks like to me a couple individuals that had the ability to fill out the applications and make a spreadsheet have done this. And again, I'm not saying any of it is inappropriate or I don't have a discussion, but we need to follow a process. We have a process in this town, and it was not followed.
So I agree with you, and I think that we all got a bit relaxed about our processes, particularly at the beginning of COVID, and we did allow these specialized grants, as we all know, to start being spent. But I think what's happened here is also, I agree with you, and I do think we definitely need to approve 22, and we need to look seriously at 23, and I think, I agree, but I think what we know already on the ARP is that we can go in as appropriate and change the allocations. Is that not correct, Pete, before the project starts or after the project starts? On the ARP, we can modify the allocations, we already know that, right? On our town ARP.
I'm
No.
not aware of that.
Okay,
The RTM approved
right,
31,399.
right.
If you underspend, you
Right.
could
We can add.
reallocate.
Okay.
Yeah, correct.
So, what we have here, as I keep saying, is 3 years, 22, 23, and 24. And I definitely am comfortable, because I think it's the right thing to do, with 22, 23. Any more comments, Laura or Leslie? Oh, I'm sorry, Leslie, I didn't see
I
your
have
hand.
comments because, what we have in front of us here, now granted, ARP was sort of an entity unto itself. It's not legislation we're expecting to recur. But I think there's certainly a different view of the authority and the ability to make the appropriations among members of this board and the Board of Education, and we're getting into dictating how we expect the Board of Education to act. The Board of Education has gotten information on all of the spending and approves and accepts a financial report, and whether we're making a determination, is that our approval of the expenditures or not. I don't want to be in that place, but I do know the Board of Education has been aware of the spending and the specific line item expectations, and I don't want to ignore the fact that they have repeatedly approved the financial report, which includes these expenditures and the expectation of the expenditures. So just like the way the town has handled the ARP funding, where we've given approval on a multi-year basis for the full amount, we have gotten information from Sean as representative of the Board of Education and the administration that these are the intent of the spending. Just like if the ARP were to change, they would have to come back through BET and RTM. I would imagine, I believe the Board of Ed would have to do the same processes. So I'm wondering on what basis we really want to say that the fiscal '22 process should be different than the fiscal '23 and '24 expectations. And I'd like us to talk more about that before we segregate our authority and our appropriation for this.
And Leslie, you're comfortable with having Sean coordinate with Roland to make, and Agnes, whoever is appropriate, to modify the benefits to be whatever we're using, since we know that they've went up, increased? And you're
expectation
comfortable
is that
with,
they-
with any kind of interest or whatever being used, when available outside of the, to, again, support, administrative support for, to help all the folks here.
I
Make
mean,
sure.
to be, so two questions on the benefit expense. I think the understanding is that staff that is allocated towards a grant fund should have their benefit costs covered. So yes, I would probably ask that the Board of Education cover the appropriate allocation of benefits on whatever methodology is determined between the administration and the finance department. On the interest allocation, there you have, I guess let me raise the question. We haven't really determined amongst ourselves how we're getting authorization to spend the interest expense. If I recall, the ARP allocation says it is not part of ARP and the town has the freedom to use that interest expense as it so determines. So I would imagine that that also relates to the interest on the 9.5 million, which should accrue to the benefit of the Board of Education and the school administration. But they're not tied to the expenditure in these categories. They can use it however they want, and whether it meets the criteria of ARP/ESSER or not. I'm kind of talking through this.
No.
as I'm
I mean,
thinking
what
about it, so
I'm
give me a
anxious
break.
to do is make sure we anticipate additional costs that are caused, if we want to call it, by this program, and doesn't,
Can I ask the question, and Sean, I understand that you're not the sole decision-making here, but would you, I guess the decision is on the interest expense of the 9.5, would you think it's appropriate to deem it towards administration of the program versus allocation in some other way? And I guess as I'm asking that, I realize you're going to have to think about it and come back to us on how it would be
You could do
spent.
that, or we could also say, town, keep the interest and let's call it a day as far as the benefit change goes. I mean, maybe it comes out to about the same thing. I mean,
No,
many ways you can handle it.
I don't want
We have
to,
to
I
look
don't want to
into it,
blur
yeah.
things like.
I never even expected any of the interest, so.
Okay, so Pete, keep the interest. No. I mean, it's.
Whatever, we'll
and the
work
CIP
together, we'll
and
work
And you
together.
agree that we need the CIP sheets for any capital items? Just as whatever Pete and Roland said are the capital items, we need those sheets so that we make sure we track those capital items exactly like we are doing any other revenue fund. It's unusual that, at least in my time in the town, that we have capital items in these grant funds. No, I think Leslie was finished. I want to make sure Leslie's finished talking.
Yeah, I mean, on that, I don't quite feel the same way on that. I know that, for example, the only comparable one is in Cdgb, where there's a lot of capital projects, correct? And they get proposals. They're not rewritten into a CIP format.
Well, but for every other revenue fund, sewer maintenance or withdrawal or, school lunch or, any of them, we always have the capital sheets, any of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a big deal to ask them
Okay.
to write them. I guess I don't quite have the same need to see it as you do.
Laura?
I apologize. I'm going to ask a couple remedial questions, but I think everyone understands it's been a long, grueling budget process, and last night was a long meeting. So just to be clear, we just approved ESER 2, and that was within our authority. But when we're talking about ESER 3 ARP, we need to not only appropriate, we appropriated ESER 2, we need to approve and appropriate ESER 3 ARP.
I'm
Is that-
sorry, I don't understand the difference of what you're saying.
Well, I'm struggling with what, I'm trying to nail.
We approved the appropriation for ESER 2.
Right, and now we're
being
talking
asked to
about
approve the appropriation for ESER 3.
which needs to also go to the RTM.
And that's the difference, because
That's the difference, right. So-
budget resolution is
Right.
different.
So I'm just trying to, again, long month, long night.
Oh, all of us, by the
So
way.
all of us, I mean, I think we're all a little fried. But I just want to boil down the concerns, because when I look at appropriating the money for ESER 3 for human resources, I mean, these are people who we already have hired, right? I mean, July 1st, they're in fiscal '23 year.
That's right.
I want to be very clear about the message or the signals that we're sending. I want to appropriate those salaries for that human capital for fiscal '23 and fiscal '24. On teaching and learning, I wanted to do the same thing. We're talking about curriculum support, science materials, et cetera. I want to be very clear that I want to appropriate those funds. So I just want to, I'm essentially trying to, is the concern that the BOE hasn't fleshed out the capital items? Is that the concern, or?
I don't know. We're trying to do everything that we might not normally do at the budget committee level, because it's already had formalized approval on the BOE. I'm trying to cover more points perhaps than we might normally do, because our process is a little bit different than I have ever seen on my time on the BET.
Right.
So if you want to provide some
I
additional
mean, I am
guidance here.
happy to make the motion to appropriate the funds for ESER 3. My understanding is the Board of Ed has discussed this every month. My understanding is the financial report was accepted last month, maybe not unanimously, but it was accepted. So I am perfectly happy to make a motion to approve the appropriation for ESER 3.
So do you have a comment you want to
Yeah,
make
just
before a
on-
motion? or-
Yes, I do. I want to just clarify what Ms. Erickson's saying. So these, again, this is from my discussions with the Board of Ed members, this has only come in front of the board this year, so January, February, and March are the three financials where, again, it's not been an approval, it's just been, this is what's being spent, this is what's been projected. And in the most recent one, it was not, the financials were not accepted, right? You need a vote of 5 members, only 4 members approved it, so. There were 2 abstentions, 4-2, yeah.
So a majority approved.
So do you need 5 votes to pass on the Board of Ed? You don't need 5 votes?
No.
So that was, in your mind, that's been accepted?
Abstentions don't count.
Abstentions don't count, right? So again, I would like to see these go back to the board, again, to the Board of Ed, to have a formal approval for ESER 2, ESER 3, not just as an appendix item with the financials. And I don't think that's happened, simply because that's the concerns I've heard from Board of Ed members. And again, I'm not disputing specific items, whether it's HR, curriculum. I don't want to get into that. That's not my purview to say, well, this is, this should be in point A or point B. My concern really is that we have skirted the process a little bit in terms at the Board of Ed level, because the Board of Ed has not had a full say in how these allocations were made. And they certainly have, and certainly I know it came in front of the Budget Committee, which was 3 members, but it was an after the fact. There was no discussion with Board of Ed members. There was no input taken as to what the allocation should be. It's all after the fact. So I feel it's very inappropriate for us to be approving funds when the Board of Ed has really frankly not been part of these discussions as openly. Again, ESER 2, it's already happened. If this were last year, I would have had that same discussion. ESER 3, it's still in our control. I would like to send this back to the Board of Ed to think this through before they come to us. Again, 22, if we want to treat that separately and just get that off the books. I'm not going to support any of this, simply because I think it was really just a lack of process and, a couple individuals that made decisions on how this allocation should be spent. Again, I'm not disputing individual line items. I think they might be something that I would have agreed with. I just think we need to really focus on ensuring that the process is followed, irrespective of what department of it is, what individuals it is.
Leslie, if it's appropriate, I'd like to make the motion to approve the appropriation of ESER 3 as presented in our packet.
To approve the ESER 3 of what? I'm sorry.
Appropriation
Just appropriate. I thought you said something after that.
as presented in our packet.
As presented in the packet. Okay, that was. So Laura's made the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
So Leslie has made a second to that. So what I'm thinking is that I might make an amendment to your motion and that we'll approve it, I mean, whatever, as you said, but that, that we recommend that ESSER 3 go back, or ARP, I'm sorry, however you're referring to it, be referred back to the Board of Education of the BOE for its approval. And that if there are any modifications thereafter, that it return to the BET, the Budget Committee and the BET. So I'm making that motion that it go back. You know, again, this is this would add to your approval. This would also be included in the approval, but I don't know if there's a second.
I just need some clarity. Are you making a motion to amend subject to Board of Ed vote?
I'm making a motion to recommend that this budget be sent, you know, this is an amendment to yours, and that the budget be sent back to the Board of Education for approval, and if they make any changes, that that the, whatever it is, be returned to the BET.
Can I ask you to consider carving out fiscal '22 from that amendment, since we are so close to the end of the fiscal year? And
Yes,
have it apply to fiscal '23 and fiscal '24?
that would be fine.
Can I just clarify that, again, the intent of this amendment? Basically, what you're saying is you're asking for Board of Ed action.
I am saying approve it because I do think this board has a responsibility to approve this in fiscal year '22. And I think the RTM has a responsibility to approve it. But in the meantime, it hasn't been approved by the BOE, so maybe this is parallel action in a similar time.
I'll second your motion, Leslie.
But I don't understand, but essentially, we're not appropriating anything then, right?
Yes,
So
we're
there's no-
appropriating, we're fully appropriating, but we've got an amendment, and the amendment is on fiscal years '23 and '24. That, I mean, question for you. Yeah, I mean, I think that quite frankly, I agree with you. Any changes should only be fiscal year '23 or '24. I agree with that part of it. But I still think the BOE should approve the full amount, even though it's fiscal year '22 too. So their approval would be for the full amount, but their changes, any requested changes would only be to '23 and
And I don't think
'24. But
they'll-
I think the BOE should approve '22 as well as '23 and '24.
I don't think they're going to have the ability to, like you said, Leslie, they're not going to have the ability to make any changes to '22 because it's already happened. And that's what's the most disappointing part here is that there was not a process that was followed. So I think all
done.
we can, at this point, all we have control over is '23 and '24. And what we don't want to do today is approve this ESSER 3 funding and then relieve the Board of Ed from having any say in what's going on in '23 and '24, because as it's been very clear, we do have the ability to still make changes to fiscal year '23 and '24 if the Board of Ed so chooses, right? We can't do anything about '22 because the process was not followed. I don't support any of this, but I do understand the spirit of what Ms. Turkington is saying.
I want to be
and I think
careful that
it's
we
free.
say the process wasn't followed. I mean, this is an unusual circumstance where we received these funds. There was a process followed. It may not be the process that, some people would have liked to have followed, but I will say that the Board of Ed did follow a process. So I just am cautious about using phrases like that, which could be misinterpreted.
Well, I
that's
just,
all.
Laura, one thing that's really, if we just take like an extreme example to make a point, the Board of Ed budget is somewhere around 200 million. If one or two individuals decided how we were going to allocate that without Board of Ed approval, we would all agree that's not appropriate. So in the same case, we have 16 million of funds that came in that have been allocated and most of it now been spent without formal Board of Ed approval. That's just a fact. So when I say the process is not followed, that is absolutely, again, oversight is before and after. Before the spend, we need to ensure there was a process in place, that the Board of Ed formally took a vote to say, are we going to approve how we spend these 16 million funds? We're just a tertiary. It should have come to us later on. What we do now, that's why my disappointment is there, because I can't do anything about what was spent. But we absolutely can, and it's, again, baffling to me why this board is saying, well, it's fine just the way it is. No, it's not okay. It needs to go back to the Board of Ed. They need to think through 23, 24. It might come back exactly the same way, and that's fine. But why we would give one or two individuals the ability to fill out an application and do this allocation without full Board of Ed approval is not okay. It's just not.
I just want to be clear, we're talking about the superintendent of schools.
That's right.
And there are grant funds that are processed through the Board of Ed all the time within the boundaries and rules of those grant funds, and the Board of Ed typically does not vote on them. They are reported on every month. They are discussed. People are free to bring up issues or concerns. So I really think that we're maybe making too much of this, but I want to move forward. So let's get back to Leslie's
Okay,
amendment.
so
because
my
to be
amendment-
constructive.
So my amendment, and it was seconded by you, Laura, correct? And we'll keep it 23 and 24. Oh, no, you didn't second. I agree, right.
I seconded it.
Nisha seconded. Nisha, I apologize. Okay, those in favor of the,
I still, just practically, how does this work? So we're saying that we're approving $9.6 million, subject to, it's kind of like a condition, right? So that, that the Board of Ed take action on fiscal 23 and 24. I believe that's your amendment. We're approving and appropriating fiscal 22. We're not asking for anything else from the Board of Education on that. I want to make sure I understand your amendment.
Right.
But we are asking for the Board of Ed, not the superintendent, but the Board of Ed, for action on fiscal 23 and 24. Is that how
well,
you
actually,
expect your amendment?
you've just done it much better than I would have done it, and so I would fully support what you suggested, because I think that's a good way to do it. I think that covers all fronts. But it's actually a little bit different, but I like the way you've just presented that.
Roland?
Leslie, just from a practical standpoint, if you're saying it's conditioned until they approve this, they take some action, that comes back then and has to go to the RTM, which probably isn't going to be in till September, which means these expenditures can't happen over the summer. Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, actually, no, to be honest with you. Because I do think, that's
committed
the way
to
I said
staff.
it was differently. It was that we would approve it, but there should be a parallel process to recommend that the BOE approve it too. But we would approve it, send it on to the BET. They could go on to the RTM. But in the meantime, their approval is expected to at least review 23 and 24.
But then we're creating a problem for the RTM, right? We're approving something, expecting an action from the Board of Education, and,
They can expect the same action. There's more of them to put pressure on the BOE.
so then your amendment really is,
No, it doesn't. It approves it. It's good.
I know, but it doesn't release the funds in time for the July 1st start of the fiscal
Yes, it
year when
does.
these people are on the payroll. No, because Roland's right. The Board of Ed doesn't meet till, they've already had their April meeting. They don't meet till, well, you meet tonight for Central Middle School, but you don't meet till the third week of May, most likely. That misses the deadline for the RTM June meeting. The clock's ticking.
It was a recommendation. It wasn't a condition. That was the difference.
Oh, I thought it was a subject to.
No, that's what Leslie changed it, and I said hers was even better.
all right, so I didn't
They
change
could have a
it.
special meeting. They could have a special meeting, right, to approve
They could have a
before,
special meeting.
so I don't think that, again, alleviates that point. There's a lot of ways to do this, guys.
Yeah,
but-
again, we're doing it on the fly, if we had, time to sit down. But, I think, so I'm going to take a vote on the amendment. Leslie?
All right, so the amendment is to recommend, using your language, which I think is probably more correct, is to recommend that ESER 3 be referred to the Board of Education or for its approval for fiscal 23 and 24.
Correct.
I'll vote yes.
Laura?
I'm going to vote no.
So let me just. And I vote yes.
Are we just voting, I just want to clarify, are we voting, are we
We're
going to vote
only voting on the
separately?
amendment.
Are we going to vote separately on the ESER 3 approval?
Then
Or is
we
this
add, we either add the amendment if it passes, or we don't add the amendment, and then we vote on ESER 3
So once,
afterwards.
if this were to pass, we're still going to go back and approve, we're going to vote on the amended,
Correct.
all right, so then I'll vote on the amendment. Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, so that vote was 3-1-0. Okay, so now we will vote on the amended ESER 3. So the original amendment, which now, who were the?
It's Laura moved it, and I seconded it.
Okay, so Laura?
So sorry, just to ask a clarifying question. So this does not hold up. The Board of Ed can have its meeting or special meeting whenever it chooses, but this can still proceed on the RTM on the regular timeframe. Is that correct?
That was my understanding of how we put together the motion.
It's so it's.
That's my
it's like a
understanding of how we
SOMR.
put together the motion.
We're doing a SOMR on the BET Budget Committee. Okay. I will vote yes.
Okay, so Laura votes yes. Leslie?
I vote yes.
Leslie Tarkington votes yes.
And I'm a no for the
And
same reason.
Nisha's a no. Okay, so the vote on that is 3-1-0. So,
Sean, do you have
thank
any?
you for all of your time, Sean.
I'm wondering if he has any questions for us, because if there's any confusion, now's the time to ask. Everyone's tired,
Anybody have
so
any
let's just be
recommendations for a
clear.
beer?
Thank you very much, Sean. Okay, so that was, so Tyler, thank you very much for sitting through our lengthy discussion of grants. So do you have a grant that you would like to discuss with us? Yeah, yes, either here or the table, whichever you're more comfortable. So we have Tyler Fairborn, who's in charge of the Community Development Block Grant, and he has a request for approval to use a Community Development Block Grant of $1,002,042. And he has given us a breakdown detail, and he has a resolution that he would like us to approve, correct? We approved two things.
Thank you all for having this item on the calendar. This is our annual submission for the Cdbg program. A little rusty. I think it's been like 3 years since I was in front of actual humans going over this. I'm trying to remember what we did. I think we usually just do a quick overview of the process. This is an annual entitlement grant that the town gets from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Funding to be allocated to nonprofit community partners who are doing work almost exclusively with low and moderate income, 70% of the threshold. So what we do every year is put out an RFP in January. Green means go. Okay.
Yeah.
We put up the application in January. We give people 30 days to submit their applications. We then have a series of public meetings and public hearings at which the applicants can present and members of the public can offer input if they'd like. The Community Development Advisory Committee, which is made up of a member of each RTM district, 2 members of the BET, and then other members of the community, will evaluate and do site visits and interview the applicants to make their recommendations to the first selectman, who then forwards his final decisions to the BET and the RTM for approval. After BET approval, this goes to the RTM at the June meeting. It has to be at the June meeting, or else we miss our August deadline to apply to HUD, after which you can't get funded. So we come before you with the recommendations as they are, and the resolution is the one we typically use at this stage in the process. If there are any questions, I hope I was able to sort out some of the confusion, and understandable confusion with how I sent it out. I get a little in the weeds with the acronyms and the numbers and which goes where, and I forget that not everybody is doing that all day, every day. So I hope that the email I sent earlier clarified a little bit what that $1,002,042.83 is comprised of, and how it was allocated to the different groups who've applied for funding.
So now that you've referred to it, and it was an exchange with you and Laura, do you want to just point out what the key points were so that the public gets to know what was in the email?
Can I ask my question and then?
Oh, yes, you certainly can.
Yeah, I was just having trouble trying to tie out the math, and maybe it's not meant to tie out completely, but the estimate for the programs, including the public service, the facility activities, and the administration fees, as well as the contingency, totaled about $915, and the estimated amount available is $809. But there's funds available from prior years, so you have a pot of money you can tap into. Not necessarily you're going to spend all of it, but you have the ability to spend more than the 808.
Correct, and that's one of the features of this program that I think is great for the communities it serves, which is that if a project comes in under budget, great. We don't lose that money. It can go back into projects the next year or a year after, depending on when the program was originally funded. So in addition to the 808,557, which we're anticipating, there's 172,768.73 in money from prior years where they either came in under budget or I think in one or two cases, the applicant that was awarded money in 2020 was not able to actually conduct their program because of COVID. But we do get to hang on to that money and just push it to a project in the next year. That next year is now. And because we had that extra money, we were able to fully fund all of the capital requests this year.
Do you have any more?
I wanted to ask about the reprogram funds, and it's a specific project. So my understanding is the pavilion was approved last year for Nathaniel Witherall, and they completed that project, or actually I don't know the status of the project, and they returned some money. Is that correct?
Yeah, the pavilion was the bulk of the 172. It was about $90,000. They did some exterior work. I think it was they had been awarded $160,000. It came in well under that. I worked with both of the Larrys at Witherall to see if we could find some other exterior projects that might fit the scope of the original grant. To use some of that money, we couldn't find anything else that they needed to do, but we fortunately get to put that into the pot this year for capital projects.
I don't know. Any other questions for Tyler? Nisha?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Tyler, nice to meet you. I haven't gotten a chance to meet you. Just for my benefit, and I know you haven't seen these guys in 3 years, but I've never been part of this process. What's the process in terms of, I'm just focused on the first part of your spreadsheet, which shows the 131 that was allocated across the different public service entities. What kind of criteria do you all use? And, is it just, for example, are these the only entities that applied? Were there certain entities that are dismissed? I mean, do you look at is there, in the application, are you looking at, for example, how much assets each of these entities have, how much ability they have to fund these programs? Or is it more you want to make sure everybody gets a little piece of it, so you do a pro rata based on everyone that asks?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a little bit of both. So we are unfortunately capped, and this is something that I hope HUD changes moving forward. With Cdbg funds, you're capped at 15%. You can give no more than 15% of what the town gets to public service activities. So with Greenwich, it has an exception, it's 16.25, but it's in that range. So that was, we kind of take what is the absolute most we can give to these activities. And then we set a minimum threshold of $5,000. The advisory committee doesn't like to recommend an award less than $5,000 because at that point it just kind of becomes an administrative burden for the organization. It's more of a hassle than it's worth if you're getting $2,000. So they make an effort to give everybody something, and they over the course of a month will conduct site visits and meet with the organizations to determine, is this something they can carry out? Do they have the funding to carry it out? If not, awarded the entire CDBG amount. We have everybody submit their most recent audits so that we make sure everybody is financially viable before they get a grant. And then they when it gets down to which organization gets a little more than the others, they'll look at number of people served, prior awards, funding the organization might have got in a different category. So maybe an organization who didn't get as much in service got more in capital. In this instance, TAG was the only organization that wasn't funded on the service side, but they received funding from the additional CDBG CV funds. So that's always a consideration to be sure that we're covering not just all of the organizations, but people who are really serving an array of need. I think that's one of the ideas as well behind giving everybody a little something to be sure that you're meeting all of the different needs that come before us during the planning process.
And then everybody, just to clarify, everybody that applies gets something, or is it?
Not always.
Not always.
Not always, yeah.
And then the committee is making a specific recommendation, which you then have to take, or those are just recommendations and you still get the final?
So I have no say, which is, I think, how it should be. The committee is made up of people from all across Greenwich who know what the needs are in their districts and their agencies. They make the recommendations to the first selectman, and then the first selectman has the authority to change as he sees fit. But this year, as most years, he goes with their recommendations.
Thank you.
Questions?
No, I given that we've seen these things before, the committee is really very active and thorough. And I think unless there's specific information that we may have, I certainly would go with the recommendations of the committee. And I think it's always been a very inclusive and detailed process. So thank you for your efforts and the committee's efforts. I know we have 2 BET members who sit on it as well.
Yeah, so this is the third community I've managed CDBG for, and it's by far the most involved citizens advisory group. They do an outstanding job.
Well, that's always nice to hear. So I think what we have, Laura, I'm sorry.
I thought I might just want to get my other question on the record, because it is a large sum of money for the Greenwich Communities, also Greenwich Housing Authority for $200,000 for Agnes Morley. So do you want to just explain the scope of that project? My question is this the full scope, or is this part of a smaller part of a bigger project? Can you just give that answer for the public record?
Absolutely. So in 2021, the Housing Authority, Greenwich Communities, was awarded funding for Agnes Morley Heights window replacement. I believe that application, when it came before us, it was for the 4th floor to do the windows to make it more energy efficient. This year, the $200,000 recommendation is for the 3rd floor, and the idea there was that they would combine the two so that you can do it at one time, so that you're not, in 1 year setting up scaffolding and doing 1 floor, taking it all down, and then the next year doing it all again. As far as saving time and money, it was more efficient for them to do both. And my understanding, based on my conversations with Tony Johnson, are that there's not going to be another year we're waiting to bundle a different floor. These are the 2 floors that are going to get done. The second floor, I think they'll address another time, I guess.
So just adding, though, for Greenwich Communities, also Parsonage Cottage is here for a chiller replacement for $92,000 too. So there's another, I always am pleased when I see Greenwich Communities on your list. So it's good to see that allocation. So do I have a motion to approve I'm not sure, do we approve both the allocation and the resolution, or just the resolution?
I thought it had been both, and then
Okay.
the resolution moves along with what we send to the RTM at the end of the month.
I'll make the motion to approve $1,02,042 for the Community Development Block Grant and the attached resolution.
And the attached resolution, both.
I'll second it.
Okay. Those in favor, do we need we just do this? 400.
And just for clarity, this goes to the full BET and it's required to have a public hearing at our meeting on
That's
Monday?
correct.
Is that correct?
It needs to it needs to be listed at the beginning, and then it opens it for a public hearing, and then we put this at the end of the agenda, or maybe, depending if the agenda's short, down further, in order to give enough time before we vote on it. Correct. So, Tyler, your grants took much less time than the Board of Education's.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.
It is. It is great. So, next on our agenda is the fire department, and we have Charlie Lubowicki with us, and he has just learned a lot about the town. So Charlie is the newest member of our fire administration, but of course she's been with us before. So he's here to put forth a request for additional appropriation for overtime.
Yes.
And he did send us a letter, and it was dated May 9th. So would you like to put forth your request, please?
Yes. Thank you for having us this afternoon. This originally was supposed to come with our other appropriations that we brought forth, I think it was March or April at this point, losing a little bit of track of time. A little issue on our part, as I'm learning the system, I was going on 26 pay periods. This year we have 26 pay periods plus 13 days before the new year starts, which makes a little bit of a technicality, and so that's why that had to get pulled, and this is the new improved version. Mostly, it falls on, obviously, we had a long amount of time before the CBA was finalized. A certain amount of money was encumbered to take care of that. However, the actual money that was taken to cover the retro payments was actually around $793,000, $331,000 over what was already encumbered, which was leaving us with a deficit from the beginning on this. So over the last couple months, we've tried to come up with a plan that would have the least amount of effect on the general line for the town. And so, as I put forth in the letter, we are going to be looking today for an appropriation of the $275,000 from the general account. However, we were also already able to recoup the vacation and sick buyout pay from Human Resources, and we believe we're still going to have a little bit more shortening, but we'll be able to do that via transfers next month as well. With that being said, as far as how we did some of this, is we did tighten up some operational spending, kind of looked at plans that we had going forward for the next year or so, and that we were able to put some stuff off past July 1st. Some other place we were able to save some money is obviously due to COVID, and working with our supplier at Yale for physicals. A lot of that had to be put off because it wasn't possible to do regular stress tests and the pulmonary function tests that are required in the COVID environment. And with Human Resource, we actually just redid that RFP, and we're going to be starting that entire process again in the new fiscal year. So that's where we were able to have some of our savings.
Thank you. Any questions? Laura?
So I just want to be sure we're telling the right story. And I think that just the transfer from the general fund is not the full story, because your overtime shortfall is $520,000. So I understand, and this is more maybe of an accounting process thing, not necessarily for you, Assistant Chief Lubowicki, but I'm wondering why we're doing this in two steps instead of one. wouldn't it make more sense to dispense with this item in one fell swoop and have a second cover sheet authorizing the transfers from the 200 and 300 MOCs?
So I'm going to refer this to Roland to respond to your
That was
question.
part of my doing. To keep it separate, because this goes to the RTM, whereas the transfers stay within the BET.
Right, but I want to tell the story to the RTM because there may well be an interim appropriation for fiscal '23. We don't know, but it may be. And I want to tell the story that the shortfall isn't 275. The story is it's 520. And this is how it's being addressed.
I guess one reason that we put it off to June was that we would have a much better idea as to how much could be transferred from which account to another account. That's a month away.
And if you remember, originally, this was also supposed to come a couple of months ago, and Charlie's explained that. So I understand what you're saying, but the good news is by June, and when it goes to the RTM, we'll probably have the information, because Charlie will get it in before the RTM meeting, I'm sure.
Yeah, just to be clear, I have no
So
objection
they-
to this. I'm just questioning, I think the explanos to the RTM shouldn't be, it's a $275,000 shortfall. It's a larger shortfall, and this is how we're addressing it. This is what we need from you to help us solve this issue.
So I think that's a very good point. So maybe Charlie wants to forward the explanos to you, and then you can review it.
Yeah. I apologize for not opening with that. The total issue is around 520, and this is how we plan on attacking it with those 3 different steps to come up with the full 520,000.
I think Laura's giving you good advice, and so I think when you put together the fire department puts together the explanos, or you put them together, that it be inclusive of the full explanation.
Yes.
Leslie?
I think this is an item that we've talked about during the Budget Committee, and I'm sure my colleagues will remember, but clearly overtime in the department has been an increasing number. It's been at a high level for the past couple of years, and there's always a lot of questions as to what the derivation of those numbers are, what's really driving it. Is that the best way, excuse me, to staff the department? Is it a remnant from prior staffing models that then moved to this one? So I think I just wanted to take the opportunity to say that this is something that I think we all should look at, and whether, on the BET, whether this is an HR committee project or a budget committee project, I don't know. It certainly derives from the fire department, and maybe it's a liaison project, but I think we all want to kind of better understand what drives that number. It's been increasing. It's at a high level. You only have limited sources in your budget. We've noticed over the past 5 years, 200s and 300s and 400s are getting squeezed more and more and more to fund the 100 budgets. And I think there's not an indication that there's something wrong here, but I think a better understanding of what are the drivers, and how is overtime derived, and how is the staff deployed, and the staffing model would probably be useful to look at this point in time. I have no issues with this particular request. I did have to work through the numbers again. That the retro pay issue is also, it's an interesting thing, because each department, and I learned something today from Mr. Geiger, as I always do, but each department allocates, when there is a contract that is not yet finalized, they put in the allocation for retro pay for when the contract is finalized, but it's a guesstimate at a number. And then the department has access to those funds, so it doesn't always stay whole. So I think, as far as a policy, we should also look at, and hopefully the few times where we have an open contract and retro pay is being put in as an encumbrance, that encumbrance should stay untouched until it becomes, the contract is finalized. I'm not sure that always happened in the past, but that's a separate issue. Again, it's a looking forward, trying to correct things for all departments looking ahead.
So Leslie, are you saying that this money may have been there else before, but it got spent on something?
I think it's not quite clear exactly, and again, I'm not pointing fingers, but when retro pay is calculated and encumbered, it's an estimate to begin with, and then it does sit in that 100 line item that may or may not stay untouched, especially as time goes on.
So also, maybe you can explain to us, Charlie, why is overtime a retro pay encumbrance? Overtime. Overtime lines caused by a shortage of retro pay encumbrance. Why isn't that salaries?
It isn't.
Oh, Roland.
Because if there's an increase to the base rate, the overtime rate goes up as well, at the same percentage. So if there was say $1 million of overtime and it went up 2.5%, overtime goes up 2.5%, just as salaries do.
Perfect. Thank you, Roland, for the answer.
And if I may comment on Leslie's question or statement earlier, that is one thing that we have started looking at, is trying to drill some of this down. One thing that will be coming forward later probably in the beginning of fiscal '23 is looking at the funding that we can get from fire marshal's fees. Obviously, Greenwich is reopening, and the amount of special event permits, tent inspections, things that we're going out for is causing a larger amount of overtime in that area as well. I think there's also a misconception that any overtime we have is just directly related to covering shifts in the firehouse, and it actually is much more expansive in that because of the contract, because we pay people for training time, for different fire prevention events, as well as fire watches at fireworks and standbys and things like that. So figuring out what we can do to be the best fiscal responsibility and recoup some stuff and decide what is part of taxpayer funding, and also what we could try to recoup a little more as well.
Also, it sounds like some of those projects could also be done by the volunteer forces too, huh?
And I'm sure with conversation it could be.
Thank you. Nisha.
Thank you for that report. And I'm going to echo some of what Ms. Moriarty said. We'd just like to get a little bit more clarity and some kind of just understanding of what are the drivers of the overtime, which I think you're committed to. We've talked about this a little bit more and trying to understand, because I think that is one piece we really have to get in control, simply because of what we're hearing, and we heard this last night as well, at the RTM meeting. We want to see a stronger commitment to the volunteer force, and I think Ms. Tarkington just made that point as well. I think everyone's watching, it's not just our board, but the RTM's watching, and the community really wants that, and I know I've spoken to the chief, I know he's committed, and I know you're committed to kind of trying to figure out what that perfect balance is, but I think some of it, of course, is trying to figure out how are we going to collaborate with our volunteers. Some of it might be going back to our contracts. I know we have that 3 men on a truck, 4 men on a truck kind of minimum, which kind of also drives some of these numbers for OTs. We got to look at everything as a whole. For now, I think we're in a position where, of course, we're going to have to approve this. We had COVID. There were a lot of other constraints that came into this number, and I absolutely appreciate that, and thank you for all the service. But I think looking forward, we have to be very cognizant, right, of the fact that so we're going to look at the next year when this happens again. We want to make sure we're going to ask some tougher questions to you. So just want to give you a heads up. Right now it is what it is, but looking ahead, please know that we really want to see a stronger commitment. There's an SOP out there. I don't know whatever comes out of it, but there are some decisions that are going to have to be made that we're also keeping an eye on. And I know you all are committed, but those are questions that are going to come up going forward.
And it's all things that we're doing our best to collect intel, especially from both the volunteer and career side, as much as possible, and use the insight from the BET and the RTM to move forward along with their liaisons.
If it's appropriate, I'd like to get back to the agenda and make a motion to approve $275,000 from the general fund balance to Department 205, account 51100 for overtime services.
I'll second.
Question, is this a routine?
Do we normally discuss that after the vote?
Well, we can do it now and do it all at once unless you want to do it. Are you moving this as
I
routine
am,
or
I'm happy to
non-routine?
move it as a routine item, if only for the fact that I think that Assistant Chief Lubowicki has had a long week, but if there are questions from BET members, I'm sure he'd be happy to come on Monday night if he needs to.
You don't want any more overtime?
No, he doesn't get
I don't get
overtime.
any
He's
overtime.
MC.
Any overtime?
He's
Right.
MC.
Yeah,
Right.
this is for the love of the job.
Trying to connect it all.
She's
trying to
been
connect
in
the
since
dots.
December, right? When did you join the,
December 2nd.
December
Oh, sorry,
2nd.
December 6th.
and you've just survived your first budget.
Yes.
Right, then maybe you should come if it's no OT.
So I will move it as a routine item. I don't know if my second or,
But that's fine. The chair can always change if necessary.
Those in favor? 4-0-0. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Charlie.
Thank you all.
We really appreciate, and your patience too. But think about how much you learned. Okay, so the next, we have something from the finance department. So Pete, are you going to do this or Roland?
I can do it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
On the Cdbg grant, are you guys?
Well, it's because it's a public hearing. I wasn't sure that we needed to,
Separate.
okay. And I didn't think BOE would be routine, so I didn't even ask the question. I'm sorry, Pete? Or Roland?
Yeah. You know, back in early part of this year, the BET voted to have the OPEB funds managed by Vanguard. At that time, when the budget was put together, we didn't have a line item for administrative fee like that, so this is simply a transfer up to administrative line, a professional fee line to pay Vanguard for the last 6 months of the fiscal year. It's budgeted in next year for about $75,000.
Okay.
can I just ask, where is it budgeted for next year? Is it in the 149?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. But we're taking this from healthcare?
Yes.
Okay.
A motion?
I move
Can I-
that. Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm
To
sorry.
make the motion, I just want to, I know that IAC's agenda for Thursday came out this morning, but, so they will be looking at the fact that the OPEB board issue needs to be resolved, that we're down to one member, I believe, and then the discussion of Vanguard's performance and the investment policy. I think that's going to be, that's important for that fund going forward.
Okay.
All right, so I'll make the motion to approve the transfer of $35,000 from account 57010 to 51470.
I'll second.
Those in favor? Oh, routine, I assume, right?
Yes.
Those in favor? 4-0-0. Thank you, Roland. So Roland, we now have PL2, the Perot Library, for $15,000 transfer for painting expenses. Roland, do you want to just give us a little update on that one? Are you our person for that?
Yes, so the library had a painting project which ran over budget. They were able to cover it within the funds that they have, and this just represents a reallocation of the budget.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the transfer,
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
and I'll say routine too, if Nisha, that's okay?
Okay, those in favor? 4-0-0. 4-0-0. Okay, so finally, we come back to Roland for the economic conditions report. So still some good news, right, Roland?
If you look at conveyance, still going quite well. The one thing about the April results, it does not include the sale of 100 West Putnam, and that alone resulted in $509,000 of conveyance revenue. That'll be appearing in May. 509,
Wow.
That's our share, or?
yes. It was
That's-
sold for, I believe, $205 million.
205?
Yes.
That's less than originally, I think we heard, or was it? Anyway, that's great. That's great news.
And the building permits continue to do well. I spoke to Bill Maher, and he said There wasn't anything large in either of the last 2 months, but there was just a lot of sizable activity, a lot of volume.
Wow.
And on the interest, you can see the impact of the rates going up and the actions that the Treasury Department's been doing in terms of investments.
Okay.
Just,
So-
this is a little premature, but I know when we vote on the mill rate on Monday, we'll want to reconfirm on Monday that the estimate for projected full year for available fund balance, I think we checked with you twice that the estimate is still going up about 2 million for estimated fiscal '22, and whether any of this new news will change that, but that's for Monday. Thank you.
Yeah, on the rest of the revenues, the taxes are still ahead of last year by about $6 million. Half of it's driven by the higher tax levy, and the balance is the fact that we did not have any settlements to speak of during the fiscal year. The bridges is still the same, $1 million up. Permits are up. Some of the odd things are the beach passes are down. There's a little glitch in the direct track interface, so we're about $300,000 short. So that'll also be appearing in the May results. The encumbrances are down from a year ago, but $1.4 million will be posted in May. Encumbrances we've closed out, so that'll bring it up comparable to a year ago. And I think that's about it for the encumbrances, or for the revenues. If you look at the other funds, they're all doing quite well. Parking is up. Witherall's results do not reflect April.
Sorry, what did you say on Witherall?
Revenues do not reflect April. So they're running quite a bit ahead of last year. Sewer maintenance is running ahead. The only one that is behind is the golf course, and that's because of COVID. A lot of people waited. They didn't buy their passes in the spring. They actually bought them in July and August. So we should see that catch up over the next month or so. And school lunch is quite a bit ahead as well. And the last piece is the expenditure side. IT is ahead of last year, and the bulk of that is due to moving capital into operating. That is also happening at the Board of Ed, but the Board of Ed also has ESSER funds in there that will be moving out once the appropriation is set up. And there's also expenditures for the Eastern Civic Center repairs, which we didn't have a year ago. So next month, we should see a little bit better. Once the ESSER has been moved out, we should have a better result.
Just a question on school lunch. I think I've asked this before, but that $670 contribution for 2022, some of that is for prior year losses. So we should really, I know it's a numbers thing, but it's really,
It is. There's only
so they're not doing as well as this shows, is all
not quite, but
my
still-
only point.
Still much better.
And just to confirm that any department that believes that they're going to exceed their budget in fiscal '22 would have had to come to this BET budget. So we've seen fire is the only one that is in
correct.
that situation, which I find interesting. The Board of Education, I noticed in their last financial report that they posted, their special education out-of-district tuition is running $1 million higher than budgeted. And we know that that's going to carry over to fiscal '23, and the budget was not increased to cover any of that. So they're behind the 8 ball a little bit.
But if you look at, the 10-month annualized budget, which doesn't necessarily mean as much because we don't budget monthly, but you can see we're $10 million below the spending of the annualized budget. So I think we're going to end up in a pretty good place by the end of the year.
Thank you, Roland. So I'll just add here that, a lot of times I talk about the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index for the area, and the only thing I'll mention is the last 2 or 3 months, our Budget Committee meeting has landed the day or so before they announce their numbers. So what I have to report is March, not April, because April doesn't get announced until tomorrow. But in March, it's up 1.3% over the month and 6.1% over the year. So, we are seeing the impact of inflation, at least in this shorter term, in our area, although not as high in numbers as we see on a national basis. So we now come to the point of our minutes. So, do we have any motions on our minutes?
Can I ask a question? I had sent Consolidation Day 2 changes, which we talked about, so.
I think they're fine, aren't they?
So the minutes that we're considering are okay. So I'd like to move April 12th and March 2nd for approval.
Okay. Is there a second?
A second?
Okay, so Leslie moved and Laura seconded. Those in favor? 400. Okay, so then we have 2 more sets of minutes we have on this agenda. So Leslie, why don't you give us an update?
Right, so February 3rd, which is the next one on the agenda for budget hearing days 2. Last week was a pretty tough week for all of us with a lot of meetings, so I did not get to review those minutes as quickly as I would have liked, and I apologize to my colleagues. There are a couple of changes I suggested only this morning to the February 3rd, so
It was almost lunchtime, I think.
it's still this morning. But right before I had to change my clothes to get down here. But, so I understand if we want to defer those minutes, I'll totally leave it up
Okay,
to
so
everyone,
has
but,
anyone looked at Leslie's changes for day number 2? I'm sorry?
Yeah, so
Is it worth just, are they brief?
I'd like to defer.
They're
You
very
wanna
brief.
defer?
Would you like to see the printout?
So the changes are, Jeff Raymer was in attendance on that day. Under the Board of Ed, this was the Board of Ed review of on their budget. And the second paragraph, where Mr. O'Keefe was introducing the changes to their budget, he talked about the head round requests.
The February 3rd one we're looking at?
Yes. And I had track changes that I sent at noon or whatever it was.
Is this your?
But you can read it fast.
But I just reordered it because reducing overtime is their key objectives rather than the cleanliness standards, but that's not a substantive change. What was a substantive change is there was a statement saying regarding that 50% of the salaries will be grant underwritten. I don't believe that's correct, and
Do we need to check this out? I actually didn't check my
My
notebook.
question's answered. Let's defer. I was wondering.
Okay,
if we could-
grant in our
okay,
front of us.
we will defer the next 2 sets of minutes, okay? And that's gotten too complicated. And we'll add more to that group. So, okay, fine. So our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, June 14th at 1 p.m. And I think the one thing I would like to bring up, though, just as we have a condition to release, or conditions on the Round Hill Volunteer Fire Company's budget. And so I would request that, if possible, within the next week. If you would just send me anything you would like to see, obviously, we didn't get the Banksville budget, we didn't get their updated financials, other than I think I found their 990 form, which of course is always one year in arrears, and circulated that. But anything that you think we should have, and fortunately have Miriam here too, because I think she was the author of the condition, as I remember. And so Nisha, I know, worked on the amendment for the additional funds. So if we could just, within the next week, or, or even sooner, and then I will forward that to the fire department to see if they can assemble the package so that the funds will be available for Round Hill on July 1st when they would become available. Laura?
I wondered if you would mind if I asked Dan a question as one of the liaisons to public safety, if that's something they've been discussing. Because I think some of this can be done in those meetings. I mean, I think that does help a little to have those conversations, so people are prepared.
I think anything, I just was looking ahead to what we need to do, so.
But if I-
And especially since we had the author of the amendment and the author of the condition, both here in the room.
But it doesn't necessarily, I mean, it would be nice if it came in June, but there's no pressure to do so. It could come in July or whatnot. I mean, there's a lot on the plate right now with the issues that were reviewed last night at the RTM.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Roland, how do we disperse the money, like to the Round Hill Firehouse? Do we, when we put it in their budget, how do they get their money?
We just write a check.
On July 1.
On July 1?
I believe so. It might be in two pieces, but yeah.
So that's why I suggested.
Because not a reimbursement of any sort like that?
But if I can make the point that the condition is only on the 30,000 additional.
Right.
That the base amount in the budget,
Right.
can get allocated on the normal schedule. Because the condition itself talked about the decision-making process, so it's not as simple as what questions do we
No, I know. That's
we
why I
have.
didn't.
We almost need the input from the fire department on really thinking about what they should be doing to be fair and equitable to both companies.
I thought if we got a start on it, or people put forth what they are expecting, it will help whoever is working on this. Okay, so with that, at 3:46, silence, no motions?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay. 3:46. So I also want to thank Roland and Pete for their long hours throughout the budget season in support of the Budget Committee and all their work, and the very, very late night last night and the lengthy meeting today. Thank you, Pete and Roland, and thank you. Thank you, everyone else, too. Nisha and Leslie and Laura. And on Monday, we determine the mill rate. Thank you.